up on this Tuesday edition of Newsline at noon. North Korea has yet to respond to South Korea's final offer of talks on reopening the joint Gaeseong Industrial Complex. Seoul wants Pyongyang's assurance the factory zone will not be unilaterally closed in the future. Buoyed by improving exports of ships and chips, Korea posts a current account surplus for the 17th month in a row in June. The cumulative surplus for the first half of this year has smashed records. Plus, Israel and Palestine resume peace negotiations for the first time in 3 years in Washington, with the U.S. urging both sides to make reasonable compromises. The two sides will likely focus first on how they will proceed with a peace dialogue. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Where's the best place for bibimbap?
Les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver se dérouleront-ils à Pyeongchang?
هل أنتم حقاً سابع أكبر مصدر في العالم؟
この歌手は誰ですか？你好，最近哪部电视剧的人气最旺？
Korea is attracting interest from around the world. The more you know, the more you want to know. Dynamic Korea.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi Yusan in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Let's start with Ksong. The South Korean government made what it called its last proposal for talks to the north regarding the normalization of the Gaeseong Industrial Complex on Monday, but it has yet to get an answer.
Well, let's now go to our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee live at the ministry. Hello, Sung-hee. So no response from the north yet?
That's right, Yusan. We are still waiting for an answer from the north. Now, officials from the two countries held their first phone call of the day via their inter-Korean hotline earlier this morning, but the north did not mention Seoul's proposal for talks. Now, the two sides call each other at 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. every day to notify each other of the start and finish of their shifts. Now, we are guessing the North is most likely taking its time to review what actions to take in response to South Korea's final offer that was made on Monday for a 7th round of working-level talks. Now, the offer was made through this inter-Korean hotline, and although Seoul did not lay out when and where the meeting should take place, it had requested a swift response from Pyongyang. The two have held 6 rounds of working-level talks this month on ways to reopen their joint business park, but have been unable to narrow their differences. Seoul has demanded safeguards against future closures before reopening the complex, while Pyongyang has pushed for an immediate, unconditional resumption of operations. Meanwhile, representatives from the 123 South Korean businesses with factories in the Gaeseong complex are holding an emergency meeting in Seoul to discuss countermeasures against the collapse of the inter-Korean talks last week. Now, they are expected to release a statement, so I will have more details on that for you in our later newscast. Guys?
Well, thank you as always, Sung-hee, for your reporting there, and please keep us updated as the story develops. That was our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee with the latest on Seoul's final offer for talks on the Gaeseong Industrial Complex.
A senior U.S. official visiting Seoul this week says the North Korean cargo ship seized this month by Panama transporting Cuban arms shows Pyongyang continues to threaten global efforts to end proliferation of conventional weapons. Speaking after his arrival late Monday, the U.S. Treasury Department's Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, David Cohen, said Panama has taken appropriate steps to abide by UN resolutions that ban arms trade with the North. In meetings with South Korean officials later today, Cohen is expected to discuss the effectiveness of Seoul and Washington's sanctions against Pyongyang and Tehran for their respective nuclear development programs. Military officials from South Korea and the U.S. have started a two-day high-level defense meeting on this Tuesday in Seoul. A South Korean Defense Ministry official said the biannual meeting will evaluate security threats posed by North Korea and issues related to Washington's wartime operational control transfer to Seoul, slated for December of 2015. The talks come amid growing calls in the South to push the date of the control transfer, largely due to continued nuclear and missile threats from North Korea. Seoul and Washington hope to decide on a possible postponement in the transfer by October. The Army Chief of the United States has warned against a planned cut in Washington's defense budget, providing the Korean War as an example of what can happen when money is slashed too severely. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
U.S. Army Chief of Staff General Raymond Odierno said Monday that the U.S. should heed the lessons learned during the Korean War when it comes to budget cuts. During a speech at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, Odierno pointed out that the U.S. struggled when it first entered fighting in the Korean War, in part because the U.S. had cut its defense budget after World War II. The general said that the failure to invest in the military had disastrous consequences.
We struggled when we first got into the fight in Korea. Why? Because we had reduced too much after World War II. We didn't have enough capabilities. We didn't invest in our capabilities. And what did it cost us? It cost us thousands of lives.
And while the U.S. did recover, Odierno said it took too long.
And it took us a year or so to recover in order for us to get in there properly and push back the North Koreans and then the Chinese back so we could establish South Korea what it is today.
The U.S. plans to cut military spending by $37 billion this year and $500 billion over the next decade. Odierno warned that the massive cuts could result in higher casualties during an emergency or intervention. The Obama administration has previously said that the budget allocated to defend South Korea will not be cut, as tensions remain on high on the peninsula due to North Korea's threats. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
In economic news, Korea's current account remained in the black for the 17th straight month in June, but China's slowing economy is clouding the outlook of the nation's all-important exports. The country's industrial output rose only slightly in June from the previous month. Our Hwang Jie has the details.
Korea posted a large current account surplus for the 17th straight month in June, and the surplus in the first half of this year set a 6-month record. The Bank of Korea said Tuesday the surplus totaled $7.2 billion last month, down from a record high of $8.6 billion in May. It was not all good news, however, as there are few signs exports are turning around. Exports fell 3.1% in June from a year earlier, slightly less than a 3.4% drop in imports. Experts say with slowdown in China, Korea's biggest trading partner, recovery of the export-driven economy is expected to be limited. They add exporters' need for raw materials weakened, while poor domestic demand reduced imports of consumer goods. The service account, which includes tourism and shipping, also totaled to a surplus of around $1 billion in June, rising slightly from the previous month. Korea's industrial output also expanded a mere 0.4% last month from a month earlier, according to Statistics Korea. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Important information for those of you who withdraw cash in Korea using cards with magnetic stripes. If you don't replace them with a card that uses IC chips, you'll soon find yourself leaving ATMs empty-handed. Starting on August 1st, 80% of cash machines in the country will no longer accept magnetic cards. Experts say these type of cards are easier to steal data from than the so-called IC cards, which save the data in a microprocessor, making them more difficult to duplicate. The Financial Supervisory Service says some $27 million in cash has been stolen from copied magnetic cards over the past 5 years. Paying with magnetic credit cards will also be restricted in stores starting in January 2015.
For your fill of Korean and international news. Join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
For the first time in 3 years, Palestinian and Israeli officials opened peace talks on Monday in Washington after intense diplomatic efforts by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. That the two sides are sitting down together is progress in and of itself, but as our Kim Young-gil tells us, the path to peace is rife with obstacles.
Israeli and Palestinian negotiators arrived in Washington earlier on Monday for preliminary talks they hope will lead to a formal reopening of negotiations after years of stalemate. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who has put peace talks between the two sides near the top of his agenda since taking office in February, says he hopes the two sides would approach the talks with open minds.
I think reasonable compromises has to be a keystone of all of this effort. I know the negotiations are going to be tough, but I also know that the consequences of not trying could be worse.
Many difficult challenges lie ahead for both sides, and they'll first have to narrow differences on what exactly the actual peace talks will entail. An Israeli official said all issues of contention will be on the table simultaneously, while a Palestinian official said they will start with border issues and security. The U.S. is trying to broker a two-state solution whereby a new Palestinian state will be created in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip alongside Israel. But the Palestinian people are less than optimistic.
It will not get any results. It will only be repeating other talks. The Palestinian side already gave up when they started the talks.
U.S. President Barack Obama has welcomed the start of peace talks between Israel and Palestine, but urged both sides to approach them in good faith. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
The European Union's top diplomat has met with the interim Egyptian government and the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood to try and mediate a political reconciliation. But both sides remain defiant, with Morsi supporters staging yet another protest late into Monday evening. Our Yurian has more.
Hundreds have been killed in Egypt since the overthrow of the country's first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi. In an effort to cool heads on both sides, the EU's foreign policy chief Catherine Ashton met with interim government officials and opposition leaders separately on Monday. She made no public comment following the meetings, but called for a transitional government that includes the Muslim Brotherhood in a statement released earlier in the day. The meetings came just 2 days after over 70 Morsi supporters were killed, and it came as no great surprise that the two sides emerged from the talks more divided than ever.
We will write a constitution that lives up to the Egyptians' expectations. We will not write another sectarian constitution. The upcoming constitution will not differentiate between a citizen and another citizen according to religion, sex, or ethnicity.
Pro-Morsi Islamist politicians, meanwhile, demanded the release of jailed Brotherhood leaders before any steps can be taken toward reconciliation.
Also, building this environment of initiatives requires a release of all political prisoners and ending the casting of accusations here and there.
Hundreds of Muslim Brotherhood members continue to protest late Monday, marching towards offices of the Interior Ministry in Cairo, demanding the military reinstate Morsi. Yunian, Arirang News.
And staying in that region, gunmen have killed at least 8 Tunisian soldiers, raising political tensions between supporters and opponents of the Islamist-led government to a boiling point. State television said the ambush on the military base near the Algerian border was the work of terrorists. It's the biggest attack on Tunisian security forces in decades. This incident comes as clashes between pro- and anti-government protesters have been intensifying since last week, following the second assassination of an opposition politician in just 6 months. Prime Minister Ali Lareid has quelled calls to form a new unity government amid the instability, instead vowing to continue leading the country. A series of car bombs tore through the busy streets of Iraq on Monday, killing more than 50 people and injuring hundreds more. The bombs appear to have been coordinated in Shia-dominated areas, including the capital Baghdad. Militant groups linked to al-Qaeda are suspected of leading the attacks in Middle Eastern countries with Shia-led governments, underscoring the sectarian strife between Sunni and Shia Muslims. A monitoring group called the Iraq Body Count says more than 800 Iraqis have been killed in militant attacks so far this month.
There's been yet another transport accident in Europe, this time in Switzerland. At least 44 people have been injured after two trains smashed into each other in the west of the country. Officials say rescuers managed to pull most people out of the wreckage alive, but the driver of one of the trains is still unaccounted for. Police say they are investigating what could have caused Monday's crash. Europe has been plagued by public transport accidents in recent days. 79 people were killed in a train crash in Spain last week after multiple carriages left the tracks as the train turned into a curve at high speed. In Italy, nearly 40 people died Sunday after a coach they were traveling in plunged down a ravine in the south of the country. There have been quite a few thoughtless remarks made by Japanese politicians in recent months that have angered Tokyo's neighbors. This time, it's the turn of Japan's finance minister, Taro Aso, who put his foot in his mouth by mentioning the Nazi regime and comments about Japan's constitutional revision. Kyodo News Agency reports that during a lecture in Tokyo, Aso suggested Japan should study how the Weimar Republic of Germany's constitution was transformed by the Nazis in the early 1930s before anybody knew what was happening. Kyodo suggests Aso's comment was meant to mean the constitutional revision should be done discreetly. However, the fact he mentioned the Nazis could trigger controversy in Japan and among its neighbors.
Pope Francis is back in Rome at this hour following a successful week-long trip to Brazil. But comments he made during his flight home are getting the most attention. In response to a reporter's question about homosexuality, Pope Francis delivered an answer that took many by surprise. Connie Lee reports.
On the way home from his week-long trip to Brazil, Pope Francis offered his thoughts on homosexuality to a group of journalists.
If a person is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge him?
Pope Francis said that gays should not be discriminated against and added that while being gay is not a sin, homosexual acts are. In his 80-minute conversation with journalists on his plane, the Pope also said the Roman Catholic Church's ban on women priests still stands.
In reference to the ordination of women, the Church has spoken and said no. John Paul II said this with a definite formula: this door is closed.
It was his first real press conference since being elected in March, and a highly unusual one at that, compared to his predecessors, as it was casual and wide-ranging. The Pope fielded all questions thrown at him, even ones on the string of scandals in the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church's first Latin American Pope has ended his trip to Brazil, which organizers say was a success. Church officials say more than 3 million people gathered on Copacabana Beach on Sunday for the Pope's last Mass. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Azerbaijan is perhaps best known to Korea for its rich natural resources, but residents there are increasingly becoming interested in Korean culture. In this first part of our special series on Azerbaijan, our Song Ji-son tells us how Korean artists captivated the locals with some kicks.
Azerbaijan, a country bordered by the Caspian Sea to the east, Russia to the north, and Iran to the south, celebrated 2 decades of diplomatic ties with South Korea last year. And over the last decade, the oil-rich country has expanded its economic ties with Korea, but also its cultural ties. Azerbaijan's economy is expanding at a remarkable pace, opening new business opportunities for Korean companies. And the exchange between the two countries is also on the rise in various aspects, including sports and culture. This summer, Azerbaijan's tourist city of Gabala welcomed a handful of Korean artists. Opening the stage was Kyung University's traditional dance team, who translated Korea's beauty in subtle yet eye-catching moves. The finale was highlighted by the Korean traditional fan dance.
Korea's traditional dance can be conceived as relatively static, with a lot of choreography expressed through the hands, so we try to portray as much movement as possible for the Azerbaijani audience, and I could feel their applause was from the heart.
Also on the program was a performance by the World Taekwondo Federation demonstration team. A spectacle of movements, highlighted by a Gangnam-style ending, was more than enough to impress the spectators.
I'm a judo fighter, and I find Taekwondo interesting with its high kicks. And it's amazing to see these petite girls jumping so high and breaking those boards.
A Korean pianist was also invited to mark the beginning of Gabala's 5th International Music Festival that kicked off on Wednesday.
We are delighted to have Korea's Taekwondo, dance, and music artists here to reaffirm the bond between the two countries. The Azerbaijani government is especially enthusiastic about expanding further exchanges with Korea.
The dance and Taekwondo company are scheduled to continue performing and promoting Korean culture throughout Azerbaijan this week. 송지선, Arirang News, Gabala.
Mark, let's now get an update on the weather with our Lee Ji-yeon standing by at the Weather Center. Good afternoon to you, Ji-yeon.
Good afternoon, guys. Well, it looks like we are in for a very hot and humid afternoon today.
Yes, well, we can't seem to escape this very severe weather we've been having, can we, Ji-yeon? I mean, it's raining quite heavily one day, and then it's blisteringly hot the next.
Right. It makes it really difficult to make plans. So we didn't have rain yesterday. Are we finally past the monsoon season at least?
Well, Yusan, to be honest, I can't tell you exactly when the monsoon season will end, but it's definitely coming to an end soon. But once monsoon season is over, we will have to deal with even more blistering heat. Now, back to today's forecast. Starting in the southern provinces, outbreaks of rain are in store for some cities in the afternoon, but not enough to bring the temperatures down. And for the central region, we started out with mostly sunny skies, but clouds will move in towards midday, bringing showers along with them, which will get heavier later at night, along with thunder and lightning. So tomorrow, the central region will wake up to lingering showers, whereas down south will only see a few sprinkles. But the AM showers will gradually go away before noon, and the clear afternoon is on tap with a glimpses of sunshine. But I do have a good news, which is we will get a little relief from the heat wave, as we are expecting about 2 to 3 degrees lower daytime highs across the nation. Now, compared to this morning, more clouds have built in already in the central regions, getting ready to drop showers later on. And the humidity this afternoon will be 85% on average, and we're looking at on and off rain for the rest of the week. Now, with that, let's take a closer look at today's readings. The daytime highs will be similar to yesterday, with Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju hiking to the low 30s, while Daegu will be having another scorching day at 34. Now, let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju will also be very hot, but Dokdo and Mount Kumgang will be staying a bit cooler at 26 and 25, respectively. Now, that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. Well, that's all for me today. Enjoy your lunch break and stay cool. Now back to you, Yusun and Mark in the studio.
Thank you, Gian. And I wish we could stay cool when it's 85% humidity, very humid.
Yes.
Those are the stories we're following at this hour, though. But just a friendly reminder that you can re-watch our program if you missed anything on our VOD service on our website.
And clips of the newscast are also available on YouTube. And we'll be back tomorrow right here on Newsline at noon.